Hello, my name is Cailin Campbell, and for my criminal justice capstone project, I am doing the deterrent effects of mandatory minimum sentencing for human trafficking. Now, to introduce this topic and some background information, human trafficking is one of the most hidden and complex crimes facing the criminal justice system today. It operates through coercion, exploitation, and transnational networks that make detection extremely difficult. Under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, trafficking includes labor or sex exploitation through force, fraud, or coercion, as well as any commercial sex involving minors. Because trafficking is so difficult to detect, lawmakers have increasingly relied on mandatory minimum sentencing, which is typically 10 to 15 years, as a way to deter offenders. This approach is rooted in the general deterrence theory, which says that longer sentences deter crime. However, more modern research shows that trafficking offenders rarely consider sentencing and because they do not expect to be caught due to the low detection rates, complex investigations, and victim reluctance, which all reduce the likelihood that cases ever reach the sentencing stage. So, this raises an important question. Do mandatory minimum sentences actually deter human trafficking? The purpose of this study was to evaluate whether these mandatory minimums reduce or deter trafficking. To do this, I examined empirical research, government reports, and criminological theory. My objectives of this research were to assess whether severe penalties influence offender behavior, examine how investigative capacity, victim identification, and prosecution rates affect deterrence, as well as determine whether policy change is necessary. And the central research question guiding this project is, what impact do mandatory minimums have on the deterrence of human trafficking? For my methodology section, to answer this question, for my research, I conducted a literature review using two academic databases, which were Criminal Justice Abstracts and Academic Search Premier, as well as federal sources like Department of Justice, National Institute of Justice, and Homeland Security. And here you can see I created my Prisma flow diagram for all of my sources. And what this entailed was that 206 total sources were identified through these databases. 187 of them were screened, and 31 full texts and reports were assessed for eligibility, and that led to 10 studies being included in the review that met my criteria. I include studies that examined deterrence theory, sentencing policy, prosecution outcomes, victim identification, and the operational complexity of trafficking networks. Because deterrence depends heavily on probability of detection, I also include research on investigative strategies, victim identification practices, prevention and disruption of trafficking models, as well as prosecution models. And these interventions shape offender perceptions of risk and determine if cases do progress to sentencing. Now, for the literature review section, I found that across all research, one finding is consistent, that certainty of punishment, not severity, is what deters crime. My source of Apple of 2013 and his research on criminal deterrence states that offenders respond to the likelihood of being caught and not the sentence length. Similarly, Nagin of 2013 says the same and claims severity has weak and inconsistent deterrent effects. When it comes to trafficking enforcement, that is defined by low certainty of punishment. My source of the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime states that countries with harsh penalties still have low conviction rates, and this report was from 2024. As well as the Government Accountability Office, they claim that there are major data gaps, poor interagency coordination on the federal, state, and local level, as well as inconsistent reporting. And furthermore, the National Institute of Justice in 2016 adds that cases fail due to lack of training and victim reluctance. And here I provided a chart that I found in the report by the United Nations Office of Drug and Crime, their 2024 global report. And this shows the trend in identified trafficking victims through the years. It also shows by gender and by age. But as you can see, from 2003 to 2022, you can see how drastically this has risen. Trafficking victims are being identified, and there's much more than there was in previous years. So this shows that this is a very relevant issue to our society. For the results of this research, the findings of the study show that mandatory minimum sentencing does not deter trafficking. It also shows that trafficking offenders operate in hidden networks with low risk of detection, as well as victim cooperation is essential but limited. And federal agencies themselves show that they prioritize investigations, victim services, and interagency collaboration, not sentencing, like what the judicial side emphasizes. And lastly, the criminal justice system's greatest leverage lies in certainty, not severity. And here I created a bar chart from the data I pulled from the Homeland Security Report Year in Review for 2024. They gave us information, and here it shows that investigations initiated, there were 3,655, 3,133 arrests, 1,092 victims identified, but only 503 prosecution referrals. This shows the drastic drop from the investigation phase to the prosecutorial phase, how there's obviously an issue with prosecution in this stage because there are 3,133 arrests, but only 503 prosecution referrals. In conclusion, mandatory minimum sentencing does not deter human trafficking. The evidence shows that deterrence depends on the certainty of apprehension and not the severity of punishment. To protect victims and to reduce trafficking, policymakers must shift towards certainty-based strategies. When it comes to investigative capacity, I believe that policymakers could expand specialized trafficking units, increase intelligence-led policing, improve digital forensics and financial tracking. And for victim identification, I believe that lawmakers or policymakers could improve on trauma-informed interviewing, offer long-term housing and legal support for victims, as well as provide training for DCS and first responders in these trafficking cases. And lastly, for interagency collaboration, I feel that policymakers could create federal state task forces that work together, offer shared data systems and databases where everyone can access the same information, and also create unified reporting standards. With these solutions, a justice system that increases the probability of detection and not just the length of punishment is far better than positioned to disrupt trafficking networks and prevent exploitation in the US as well as around the globe because of this complex transnational crime. And here I have provided a QR code for all of my references. And you can see it a little better here. And you can feel free to scan this QR code for all of the references that I added in this project. Thank you.